The vampire king returned 3 hours before destiny allowed, and the maid who should have been invisible pressed her finger to her lips and whispered 2 words that shattered everything. Stay silent. At that moment, Lucian Dravik, ancient, absolute, untouchable, obeyed a command for the first time in centuries. What he discovered in the golden shadows of his own tower would prove that the greatest horrors don't break down your door. They wait for you upstairs, in the rooms you've forgotten to protect. Lucian Dravik didn't believe in prophecy, but standing in his skybound citadel at the 3rd hour before dawn with ceremonial blood still warm on his gloves, he wondered if destiny itself had turned against him. Mira Voss pressed trembling fingers to her lips with desperate urgency. Stay silent. In Lucian's world, people didn't give him commands. He ended wars with his name alone. He ruled Velmora from shadows and gold, an immortal king whose crown still pulsed with the magic of the night convocation. Yet something in the maid's eyes, terror sharpened into steel, made him freeze. What has happened in my domain? His voice came out like frost over stone. Mira grabbed his arm with strength no human should possess, pulling him away from the grand entrance toward the darkened corridors. If you reveal yourself now, it will only seal his fate.
Hi.
Elias Dravik, his heir, his son, an immortal child who should never fear the night. Lucian had spent the evening bound by ancient ritual, presiding over blood oaths between rival houses. He'd returned early for once, carrying guilt heavier than the crown that marked him king. From the upper floors, he heard it. A child's breathing, controlled and rhythmic. Not sleeping. Not safe. Holding perfectly still. Myra's hand rose toward his mouth in warning. She will sense you. Trust me. 1 minute. No one commanded him. Not the elder houses, not the Crimson Accord, not even the night itself. Not even Seraphine Nocturne, his consort, who preferred my king when she wanted something. But Mira whispered his name like a prayer for the dying. They moved through shadows he had walked for centuries. As they approached the corridor where golden light spilled like a wound, Mira positioned him behind an ancient column. Then she pointed. Lucian saw his son kneeling on an ornate rug, small shoulders motionless. The boy's hands were folded with unnatural precision, his head bowed like a prisoner awaiting judgment. And towering over him, pacing in silk and cruelty, was Seraphine Nocturne, his consort, his political equal, the architect of Velmora's power structure. Their union was a strategy written in blood and centuries. You think stillness will earn you mercy, Elias? Seraphine's voice cut through the air like glass. Your father isn't here. He's never truly here. And when he is, he's too bound by sentiment to do what immortality requires. Lucian's vision darkened at the edges. Weak heirs become extinct bloodlines. Seraphine continued, circling the child. In the old houses, we eliminated weakness before it could spread. Be grateful I'm only teaching you inevitability. She crouched to Elias's eye level. Tell me what you are. Elias's voice emerged barely above silence. Replaceable. The word detonated in Lucian's ancient chest. If you are listening to this and feel that this story touches something quiet and unspoken inside you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, to like and share this video so we can continue bringing heartfelt stories every single day. And if it is not too much to ask, tell me where you are watching from and leave a comment below so we know which corner of the world this story has reached, because we treasure every word you share with us. Lucian surged forward. The predator's instinct roared through his veins like liquid fire. He would unmake Seraphine where she stood, unravel her immortality thread by thread with his bare hands. But Mira stopped him with impossible force. She pressed him against the stone column, her entire frame braced to hold centuries of rage in place. Not yet, she whispered, her voice ablaze against his fury. If you confront her now, she will rewrite this moment. You will become the tyrant returning to terrorize his family. She will threaten to shatter the Crimson Accord, take the alliance of the noble houses with her. You know this game. Lucian knew. He had invented this game. The union with Seraphine was never about devotion. It was a treaty to prevent a blood war that would have drowned Velmora in centuries of carnage. But his child, his own son, was kneeling on that floor and calling himself replaceable. Mira pulled something from her pocket. A device hummed with captured memory, its surface glowing with stolen moments. You need to see this before you destroy everything. She activated it. The first image appeared, captured from above, perhaps from the crystal sconces that lined the tower walls. Lucien recognized his own chambers. He recognized Elias, his son, being dragged by silver hair across polished marble by Seraphine. The boy made no sound, no crying, no protest, only teeth clenched in silent endurance like a warrior who had learned that screaming only made it worse. The next recording. Elias sat in the corner of his room, face turned toward the wall. Seraphine approached and, without warning, her hand struck the child across his face with enough force to leave frost burns on immortal skin. Elias stumbled, but did not cry out. Then Seraphine's voice, cold enough to extinguish stars. Your mother would have been ashamed of what you've become. Weakness should have died with her. The device went dark. Lucien realized his hands were trembling. Not from fear. They trembled from the rage threatening to crack open the tower itself, to bring Velmora's spires crashing down in flames of retribution. His hand moved toward the ancient blade at his side, fingers wrapping around its hilt in a reflex carved into his bones over countless wars. Mira placed her hand over his, not to restrain, but to anchor. 17 recordings like this, she said, her voice steady as stone. For months I have been documenting. She only does it when you're away. Only when you're at the convocations, at the blood treaties, at all the places where Velmora needs its king more than your son needs his father. For months. Lucien's voice emerged like the growl of something wounded beyond healing. For months. 120 days. Nearly 3,000 hours. His child had endured hell while Lucien believed his heir was safe behind warded walls. Mira nodded, her eyes showing not fear before his fury, but purpose. For months Seraphine Nocturne has been free to break him while you secured the realm. For months your son learned that silence is the only thing that keeps him alive. For months he waited for someone to notice. But no one came. Every word pierced through Lucien's chest like blessed silver. He was Lucien Dravik, the Vampire King. He had ended the blood wars. He had forged the Crimson Accord from the ashes of dying houses. He ruled the night itself. Yet he had failed to protect his own child. Why, he demanded, his voice fracturing. Why did you watch? Why did you record this? Who are you truly, Mira Voss? Mira looked at him, and in those dark eyes, Lucien saw something deeper than fear, something stronger than duty. He saw vengeance wearing patience as a mask. The one who has been waiting for you to return early for the past 4 months, she answered. The one who will tell you everything, but not yet. Right now, you need to remain hidden and witness, because what you've seen is only the surface of something far worse. Before Lucien could demand answers, a sound sliced through the darkness. A bell chimed from the ritual chamber below, its tone announcing the arrival of midnight, the hour when the hollow court's threshold could be opened. The bell's echo faded, but Lucien remained frozen behind the column, his ancient instincts warring with something he hadn't felt in centuries, helplessness. He studied his son with the focus he once reserved for battlefield strategies. Elias knelt with his spine perfectly straight, shoulders level, hands folded with geometric precision. His breathing followed a deliberate pattern. 4 counts in, hold for 7, release for 8. This wasn't the natural rhythm of a child at rest. This was training. The boy's eyes remained fixed on a point 3 feet ahead, not on the floor, not on the walls, but on nothing. A technique Lucien recognized from his own brutal education centuries ago, taught to prisoners of the old houses to demonstrate absolute submission. His son had learned to make himself disappear. Watch his hands, Mira whispered, her voice barely a breath against Lucien's ear. Elias's fingers trembled almost imperceptibly, the only betrayal of the terror coursing beneath that manufactured stillness. But he didn't move, didn't shift, didn't seek comfort or safety. The rules are simple, Mira continued, her words precise as surgical cuts. Silence earns survival. Stillness earns mercy. Perfection earns the absence of punishment. He has learned there are no rewards in this tower, only graduated levels of pain he might avoid. Lucien's jaw clenched so hard he felt ancient bone grinding. Night convocations. The memory surfaced unbidden, himself in obsidian chambers, presiding over blood oaths while elder houses circled each other like wolves. Necessary. Essential. The foundation upon which Velmora's peace rested. 3 weeks away. Blood treaty negotiations. Another fragment, standing in neutral ground between rival territories, his presence the only thing preventing centuries of slaughter from reigniting. Words spoken with the weight of absolute authority while somewhere behind him, the sun rose over a city he was protecting. 5 weeks that time. Diplomatic missions to the outer realms. His crown heavy with responsibility, his voice ending disputes that would have consumed thousands. The work of a king. The duty of immortality. 7 weeks. 2 months. 13 weeks. How many times had he returned to find Elias asleep? How many times had he accepted Seraphine's reports without question? The child is adjusting. The heir is learning. All is well in your house, my king. All is well. Lucien reached out with the oldest magic he possessed, the blood connection between sire and heir, the thread that should have hummed with life and recognition. He sent the gentlest pulse of presence toward his son, nothing that could be detected by wards or witnesses. A whisper in the dark. I am here. Nothing. Elias didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge. The connection struck dead air, like touching a mirror instead of reaching through it. He can't feel you, Mira said, and Lucien heard something like grief in her voice. She's severed the bond. Not permanently, but deeply enough that he no longer reaches for it. He tried in the beginning, called for you through the connection until his mind fractured from the silence. Now he doesn't try anymore. Lucien's vision blurred red at the edges. From somewhere below, Seraphine's voice drifted up through the tower like poison smoke. Control is not cruelty, it is necessity. She was speaking to someone, perhaps the night itself. Immortality demands strength. The old bloodlines survived because they understood this. Sentiment is a mortal disease. Her words echoed principles Lucien himself had once spoken. Principles that sounded righteous when applied to enemies, to politics, to the abstract machinery of power. But this wasn't abstract. This was his child, engineered into a breathing statue. Does he know? Lucien's voice cracked. He started again. Does Elias know I've returned? No, Mira answered. He won't dare hope for that. Hope makes the punishment worse when it's proven false. Lucien watched as Elias's left eye twitched, a microsecond of movement instantly suppressed. The boy's breathing pattern stuttered for half a count before resuming its mechanical rhythm. Even involuntary responses had been trained into submission. How long has he been kneeling there? Lucien demanded. Since sunset. 6 hours. Myra's voice carried the weight of witnessed horrors. This is what she calls meditation. Discipline of the flesh to strengthen the will. If he moves before she releases him, the meditation begins again. I've seen him kneel for 14 hours when she deemed his posture insufficiently perfect. 14 hours. An immortal child didn't need sleep like mortals did, but their bodies still felt pain, still cramped and ached, still suffering. This is merciful compared to last month, Mira continued, and Lucien heard her voice harden into something sharp as broken glass. Then, she decided Elias needed to learn consequence. She locked him in the meditation chamber, the warded one you built for magical containment, and left him there for 3 days. No light, no sound, no food, though he doesn't need it. Just darkness and silence, and the certainty that no one was coming. Lucien's hand moved to his chest, where something that hadn't been beaten in centuries suddenly ached. When she finally opened the door, Mira said, her words coming faster now, infected with barely controlled fury. He didn't run to her. Didn't cry. Didn't beg. He simply knelt in the center of the room and waited for instruction. She praised him for learning, called him her perfect little heir. The memory surfaced of Lucien's own transformation, the decades of conditioning that forged him into something harder than mortal metal. But he had been an adult, a warrior, a man who chose immortality with open eyes. Elias was a child, his son, who associated his father's authority with the same terror Seraphine had weaponized. Protection and punishment had become indistinguishable in the boy's mind. For months, Lucien said, the timeline expanding in his understanding like a wound refusing to close. 4 months of nights I was absent. For 4 months, she had absolute access. 4 months she's been preparing for him, Mira corrected, her voice dropping to something dangerous. Not just breaking him, Your Majesty. Preparing him. This escalation serves a purpose. Before Lucien could demand clarification, a new sound cut through the tower's oppressive quiet. Footsteps. Measured and deliberate. Ascending from the ritual chambers below. Seraphine was coming. Move, Mira hissed, already pulling Lucien deeper into shadow. But Lucien found himself unable to retreat, unable to abandon his son to another moment of. Myra's hand clamped over his mouth with surprising strength. Her eyes blazed with desperate command. If she senses you now, everything I've risked means nothing. The footsteps grew closer. Silk whispered against stone. Lucien allowed himself to be pulled backward into the alcove behind the column, his body pressed against ancient stone as centuries of predatory instinct screamed at him to strike, to defend, to reclaim what was his. But he remained still, watching. As his consort entered the corridor, and his son didn't even raise his eyes to acknowledge her presence. Seraphine Nocturne entered the corridor like winter personified, elegant, inevitable, and utterly without mercy. She wore midnight silk that moved like liquid shadow, her silver hair coiled into a crown more intricate than the one Lucien had worn for centuries. Every step was calculated, her posture that of someone who had never doubted their right to command. Beautiful in the way ancient predators were beautiful, refined, symmetrical, and absolutely lethal. She stopped 3 feet from where Elias knelt, studying the child with the detached interest of a sculptor examining unfinished work. 6 hours and 43 minutes, she said, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. An improvement. Last week you shifted at 6 hours and 17 minutes. Do you remember what happened then? Elias's response came in a whisper barely audible even to Lucien's immortal hearing. I began again. You began again, Seraphine confirmed, circling him slowly. Because discipline without consistency is merely cruelty. I am not cruel, Elias. I am preparing you for eternity. From his hidden vantage point, Lucien felt Myra's hand tighten on his arm, a silent reminder.
Watch. Wait.
Understand. Tell me the lesson, Seraphine commanded, her tone sharpening. Control is survival, Elias recited, his voice empty of inflection. Weakness invites extinction. The old bloodlines endured because they understood sacrifice. And what are you?
A pause.
Barely a heartbeat. Unproven. Seraphine's lips curved into something that might have been mistaken for a smile in better light. Unproven.
Yes.
Your father built an empire on strength, on absolute certainty. He brokered the Crimson Accord because the elder houses respected his capacity for necessary violence. She crouched to Elias's eye level, her hand reaching out to lift his chin with fingers that looked gentle but forced the boy's head up at an angle that must have strained. You carry his blood, but blood alone proves nothing. Do you understand? Yes, Lady Nocturne. Lady Nocturne, she repeated, releasing him. Not mother. Not when you haven't earned such intimacy. Your mother was weak, Elias. She loved too easily, felt too deeply. That softness is what killed her. I won't allow her to fail to infect you. Lucien's jaw clenched so hard he tasted copper. The lie was perfect. His first consort had died in childbirth, a tragedy even immortality couldn't always prevent. But Seraphine had rewritten that grief into a weapon, transforming loss into evidence of genetic inadequacy. During your father's absence, I have ruled Velmora, Seraphine continued, rising to pace the corridor. The elder houses look to me for guidance. The Crimson Accord's quarterly reconciliations answer my authority. Do you know why they respect me, child? Because you do what is necessary. Because I do what is necessary, she echoed. While your father plays politics and manages treaties, I ensure Velmora's foundation remains unshakable. The ancient rituals that keep our bloodlines pure, the consecrations that maintain our connection to true power, these responsibilities fall to me. Ancient rituals. Consecrations. The words hung in the air like incense from a forbidden altar. Mira leaned closer to Lucien, her whisper barely a vibration against his ear. She has claimed authority over the blood sanctum. Says it's traditional for the consort to maintain spiritual protection while the king manages temporal power. The blood sanctum. Where the oldest magics were kept locked, where treaties were sealed in ceremony, where the barriers between Velmora and the spaces beyond remained warded. Where someone with access and knowledge could do things even a king might not notice. You will inherit this responsibility, Seraphine told Elias, her voice taking on a cadence that felt rehearsed, ritualistic. But first, you must be remade, forged in discipline until there is no weakness left to exploit. Can you be reforged, Elias? I will be whatever you require me to be. Seraphine nodded, apparently satisfied. Good. Tomorrow we resume the convergence studies. Your connection to the old powers remains frustratingly dormant. We'll need to push harder. She turned toward the door to Elias's chambers, producing a key from somewhere within her robes. The lock clicked with the finality of a vault ceiling. Rest now, she commanded. Tomorrow's lessons will be particularly demanding. As Elias rose on trembling legs and walked toward his prison, Seraphine remained in the doorway. Her head tilted slightly, as though listening to something beyond normal perception. Lucien felt it then, a subtle pulse of magical attention sweeping the corridor like invisible fingers. Monitoring wards. Sound detection spells were woven so finely he'd nearly missed them. Mira had been right. The tower was listening. Seraphine seemed to find nothing amiss. She followed Elias into the chamber, and for several minutes, Lucien could hear only muffled sounds, drawers opening, fabric rustling, the clink of glass. Then Seraphine emerged alone, locking the door behind her. She stood there for a moment, one hand pressed against the ornate wood. Her lips moved in what appeared to be a blessing or protection word, standard enough. But then her voice dropped to something barely above silence, and the words she spoke made every instinct in Lucien's ancient body scream warning. The threshold opens at the new moon, Seraphine whispered to the locked door. 3 more cycles, little vessel. Then the hollow court will finally have what it requires, and Velmora will transcend Lucien's limited vision. She traced a symbol on the door that flared briefly with light the color of dying stars, a mark Lucien recognized from histories that should have been buried with the first bloodlines. The hollow court. The name alone carried enough weight to crack foundations. Exiled immortals who'd been cast beyond the veil centuries ago for attempting to unmake the natural order. Entities without form, without flesh, hungering for embodiment. They'd been forbidden, erased from the Crimson Accord. Their very names are stricken from official memory. And Seraphine Nocturne, his consort, the political heart of Velmora, was whispering to them through his son's locked door. Seraphine's footsteps faded down the spiral staircase, leaving only the oppressive silence of enchanted stone and locked doors. Lucien remained frozen, his mind replaying those whispered words until they carved themselves into his consciousness, like a blood oath written in fire. The hollow court. Myra's hand finally released his arm. When he turned to face her, the trembling servant who had stopped him at the threshold was gone. In her place stood something harder, sharper, a woman whose eyes carried the weight of surviving the unsurvivable. "Now you understand why I needed you to see," she said, her voice steady as stone. Words alone would never have been enough. "How long have you known?" Lucien's question came out like gravel. 4 months since I confirmed it. 7 years since I first heard the name. Mira moved toward the alcove where moonlight couldn't reach, gesturing for him to follow. "My family served the Nocturne House before Seraphine's union with you. We were archivists, keepers of the old records. Invisible. Trusted." She reached into her uniform and withdrew a pendant, obsidian and silver, marked with symbols that made Lucien's ancient blood run cold. "My father transcribed forbidden texts for Seraphine's research." She told him it was historical preservation, documenting extinct practices for academic purposes. He believed her. We all did. Myra's fingers closed around the pendant, until the night I heard him screaming from the archive chambers. Lucien's jaw tightened. "I was 14, Mira continued, her voice taking on the flat quality of someone recounting trauma they'd learned to carry. "I found them in the blood sanctum. My father, my mother, my older brother. Seraphine stood over them with ceremonial blades, speaking words in a language that shouldn't exist.
She was opening something.
Testing the threshold. And you. Hide in the ventilation shafts my brother and I used to play in." Myra's eyes focused somewhere beyond the present. "Watch her unmake them. Not kill them, Your Majesty. Unmake them." Their forms collapsed inward, pulled toward something on the other side of reality. The hollow court was feeding. Lucien felt ancient ice spreading through his chest. When it was finished, Seraphine turned toward my hiding place, looked directly at where I was concealed. She smiled. Myra's voice cracked for the first time. She said, "Let this one live. Witnesses serve a purpose. Fear spreads through those who remember." 7 years, Lucien said, understanding blooming like poison. 7 years you've been invisible in my house. 7 years I've been cataloging every violation, every forbidden ritual, every alteration she's made to the tower's foundational wards. Mira pulled out the memory device again, its surface now revealed as something far more complex, etched with recording sigils that would have taken years to perfect. "I learned her patterns. Where she goes when you're absent. What chambers she's converted. The specific nights when the barriers between worlds grow thin enough for her workings." She activated the device. Images flickered across its surface, blood circles drawn in Elias's chambers, incantations carved into the walls behind tapestries, ceremonial preparations disguised as child-rearing routines. 3 weeks ago, I discovered the summoning schedule, Mira said. The hollow court requires specific celestial alignments. The new moon in 3 cycles represents the final window. After that, she'll need to wait another century. The prophecy, Lucien said, pieces assembling with horrifying clarity. My return was scheduled for the morning after the ritual was complete, Mira finished. You would have come home to find Elias transformed into a vessel, the threshold permanently opened, and Seraphine holding absolute power with a hollow court as her allies. By then, breaking the Crimson Accord would have been irrelevant. The Crimson Accord, the blood treaty that had ended the endless wars between immortal houses, written in the combined essence of every elder bloodline. Its laws were absolute, enforced by magical compulsion woven into every signatory's immortal core. The first law, Lucien recited, his voice hollow. No bloodline shall offer royal essence to entities beyond the veil. She's been violating it for months, Mira confirmed. Small offerings at first. Testing the threshold's response. But the Accord's enforcement has been selective. The elder houses know something is wrong. They feel the treaty's strain. But Seraphine controls the blood sanctum and manages the quarterly reconciliations. She's been masking the violations as natural degradation. They're complicit, Lucien said, rage building beneath his words like magma beneath stone. The houses know and say nothing. They benefit from her strength. Velmora has never been more politically dominant. Under her rule, the city has expanded influence across territories that resisted you for centuries. Myra's expression hardened. Silence has become survival for them too. Speaking against Seraphine means challenging the source of their prosperity. Lucien stared at the recordings, at the evidence of his city's corruption. How did you force my early return? A ghost of a smile crossed Myra's face, grim and satisfied. The night convocation summons are bound to celestial mechanics, but they're channeled through the blood sanctum's focal points. I spent 6 months learning the summoning architecture. 2 weeks ago, I altered 3 specific sigils in the convocation chamber. Nothing Seraphine would notice, but enough to destabilize the temporal anchor. Your warning collapsed 3 hours early. You risked the entire convocation for your son. Mira cut him off. For the child, who reminds me of my brother. For the chance that maybe, just maybe, you might prove to be different than the immortals who've ruled through calculated blindness. The weight of her words settled over Lucien, like a burial shroud. I expect to die for this, Mira said simply. When Seraphine discovers what I've done, she'll unmake me like she unmade my family. The moment you move against her, I become a liability she'll eliminate. I've made my peace with that. Lucien looked at this woman, this survivor, this architect of his impossible return, and felt something crack in the center of his immortal chest. Not his power, not his authority,
his certainty.
He reached up slowly, deliberately, and removed the crown that had rested on his head for centuries. The metal was still warm with convocation magic, still pulsing with the weight of blood oaths and ancient power. He knelt, not in submission, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement of a debt that transcended politics and power. Mira Voss, he said, his voice stripped of command and filled instead with something raw and true. I swear to you, not as king, but as father, I will not let your sacrifice be meaningless. He placed the crown on the stone floor between them. Before the new moon rises, either Seraphine Nocturne will answer for what she's done, or I will burn Velmora to its foundations to stop her. The crown remained on the stone floor between them, its metal growing cold without the warmth of authority to sustain it. Lucien rose slowly, his oath still hanging in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. I need to verify everything, he said, though the words felt like betrayal even as he spoke them. Not because I doubt you, but because when I move against Seraphine, there can be no uncertainty. Mira nodded, understanding in her eyes. The blood sanctum? My own blood, Lucien corrected. The Crimson Accord isn't just a treaty. It's written into every signatory's immortal essence. Our blood remembers what our minds might forget or choose to ignore. He moved to the alcove's deepest shadow and drew the ancient blade from his side. The metal was older than Velmora itself, forged in fires that had consumed the battlefields of the first immortal wars. He pressed its edge to his palm, and immortal blood welled up black as night under moonlight. The incantation came from memory carved deeper than bone. Words in the first language, spoken before humans learned to fear the dark. His blood began to glow with inner light, and within that light, memories surfaced, not his own, but those of the Accord itself. Mira watched in silence as Lucien's eyes unfocused, his consciousness diving into the blood connection that bound every elder house to the treaty's foundation. The Accord as it was written. Clauses burning with absolute authority. No royal blood to entities beyond the veil. No summoning of the exiled court. No threshold breaches within sanctified territories. But as Lucien pushed deeper, he found something wrong. The memories stuttered and skipped like corrupted text. Whole sections felt thin, translucent, as though someone had been carefully eroding them from within. He found the alterations, subtle at first. A word changed here, a clause softened there. Modifications so gradual that the Accord's enforcement magic accepted them as natural evolution rather than deliberate corruption. The work of decades, possibly centuries. And then he saw the signatures. Not just Seraphine's essence woven through the alterations. Others. 3 elder houses had contributed their blood to these changes, their combined power enough to mask the violations from casual inspection. House Corvain, House Eldreth, House Mordain, the oldest bloodlines, the most traditional families, the pillars of Valmora's political structure, all complicit. Lucien pulled back from the blood memory, gasping like a drowning man breaking the surface. She has allies. 3 of the founding houses. I know, Mira said grimly. House Corvain controls the Eastern Territories. House Eldreth manages the blood trade routes. House Mordain oversees the military academies, together with Seraphine's influence. They control half of Valmora's infrastructure, Lucien finished. Moving against her means civil war. Or it means saving your son. The choice crystallized with brutal clarity. Politics or blood. Empire or heir. Show me the hollow court, Lucien commanded. Everything you know. Mira activated another section of her device. Text appeared, fragments from forbidden archives, testimonies from the before times when the hollow court still walked in flesh. They were the first immortals to attempt transcendence, Mira read aloud. Not content with eternal life, they sought to become eternal consciousness, pure thought without physical limitation. The ritual failed catastrophically. Their bodies dissolved, but their minds remained, trapped between existence and void. Unable to touch the physical world, unable to fully die. Hungering for embodiment. And they need uncorrupted royal blood, Mira confirmed. Blood that carries the original immortal essence, undiluted by centuries of dilution. Elias is pure lineage, your blood, Seraphine's blood, both from founding houses. He's perfect. The word perfect in this context felt obscene. The new moon, Lucien said, mind racing through calculations. 3 cycles. That's 11 days, Mira finished. The ritual requires 3 nights of preparation, then the summoning on the new moon itself, which means she'll begin the preparatory ceremonies in 8 days.
8 days.
Just over a week to dismantle a conspiracy that had taken years to construct. I'm taking Elias.
Now.
Lucien moved toward the locked door with predatory purpose. I'll break the wards, carry him out of Valmora, hide him where? Stop. Mira grabbed his arm with desperate strength. The wards on his chamber aren't just locks. They're attuned to your blood specifically. If you try to break them, every alarm in the tower will trigger. Seraphine will know instantly. Then I'll fight through whatever comes. She's had years to prepare contingencies. Mira pulled up another recording, this one showing the tower's ward architecture in glowing lines of power.
Look.
The entire structure is interconnected. Touch one ward wrong, and the tower seals itself. Every exit barred, every window warded, every threshold locked. You'd be trapped here with her, and she'd have legal justification under the Crimson Accord to defend her authority in your absence. Lucien stared at the web of magical defenses his consort had woven through his own home. Each ward connected to the next, the whole system a trap waiting to spring shut. There has to be a way. A sound cut through the tower, distant but clear. The chime of an alarm ward, subtle, easily missed unless you knew to listen for it. Myra's face was drained of color.
No.
Not yet. She shouldn't be checking the... Another chime, closer this time, then another. She's inspecting the peripheral wards, Mira whispered, horror creeping into her voice. Something made her suspicious. Lucien realized with sick certainty what had triggered it. His blood magic. The Accord communion he'd performed left traces in the ambient magic field. Seraphine would sense the disturbance, and recognized the specific resonance of treaty invocation. She would know someone had been examining the Accord's foundation. How long? Lucien demanded. Minutes. Maybe less. Mira was already moving, pulling him toward a service passage. You need to reach the secondary archive before she locks the tower. If she seals it with you outside Elias's wing, you'll never reach him in time. They ran through shadows, Lucien's immortal speed hampered by the need for silence. Behind them, he felt the tower's magic stirring like a beast awakening. Wards activating in sequence, defensive protocols engaging. They reached the archive entrance just as the first locks engaged. Mira shoved Lucien through the doorway and pressed a key into his hand. The lower vault. Third shelf. Red binding. Everything I've gathered. Her eyes were wide with fear, but steady with purpose. Don't let it be for nothing. Come with. The door slammed shut between them. Through the wood, Lucien heard the heavy grinding of magical locks engaging. Then came the sound he'd been dreading, the deep, resonant tone of the tower's master ward activating. The citadel of Velmora sealed itself. Lucien pressed his hand against the door, feeling the magic pulsing through every stone, every threshold, every passage. The entire structure had become a prison, and somewhere within it, his son slept in a locked room while his consort wove rituals that would unmake him. Outside the archive, he heard Seraphine's voice echoing through the corridors, cold and absolute. Someone has been tampering with sacred words. The tower is now under my authority until the threat is eliminated. Velmora had locked its king inside his own domain. And the countdown to the new moon continued. Lucien moved through the archive's hidden passages with the desperation of a creature caged. The tower's lockdown had sealed major corridors, but centuries of ruling this citadel meant he knew every forgotten route, every servant's passage, every architectural secret. Mira found him 3 hours before dawn, emerging from a ventilation shaft with dust in her hair and determination carved into her face. The ward rotation shifts at daybreak, she whispered. Seraphine performs morning devotionals in the blood sanctum. 30 minutes when her attention is elsewhere. It's the only window. To do what? The chamber is still locked. I have a key. Mira produced a piece of metal that looked wrong, asymmetrical, as though it had been melted and reformed. Forged from blood iron. It won't break the wards, but it will open the physical lock silently. If I'm careful, I'll have 30 minutes with my son while his jailer prays. Lucien's voice was acidic. And then what? The moment I try to remove him, the words trigger. Then don't remove him. Mira met his eyes. Break Seraphine's hold on his mind first. Make him understand he's worth saving. Because right now, Your Majesty, your son believes he deserves everything she's done to him. The words struck like a blade between ribs. Dawn came with the color of old blood. Lucien waited in the shadows outside Elias's chamber as Seraphine descended to the sanctum, her footsteps rhythmic as a funeral march. The monitoring wards pulsed with her attention, then gradually loosened as her focus shifted to ritual. Mira inserted the key. The lock opened with a whisper. Inside, Elias sat on the edge of his bed, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, spine straight even in supposed privacy. He didn't turn at the sound of the door opening. Didn't react when Lucien stepped into the room. Elias, Lucien said, his voice barely above a whisper. The boy's shoulders tensed fractionally. Nothing else moved. It's your father. Still nothing. The child's training held like chains forged from fear. Mira touched Lucien's arm gently, guiding him to kneel on the floor before his son, lowering himself to the child's eye level rather than towering above. The position felt foreign, vulnerable. Kings didn't kneel before children, but fathers did. Elias, Lucien said again, softer now. You don't have to be silent. Not with me. The boy's breathing remained controlled. For counts in, hold for 7, release for 8. Mechanical.
Survived.
He won't believe you're real, Mira whispered, kneeling beside Lucien. Seraphine has used illusion magic before. testing him, showing him visions of rescue that turned into punishment when he responded. Horror bloomed fresh in Lucien's chest. "Elias," Mira said gently, "your father has returned early from the night convocation. This is not a test. But you don't have to believe me yet. You can just listen." Something in the boy's posture shifted infinitesimally. "Can you tell your father the rules?" Mira asked. "The ones Lady Nocturne taught you?" A long pause. Then, in that hollow whisper, "Silence is survival." "What else?" Mira encouraged. "Stillness is mercy." Elias's voice was barely audible. Perfection is the only thing that prevents worse." "Worse than what?" Lucien forced himself to ask. "Than what I deserve." The words detonated in the room's quiet. "And what do you deserve, Elias?" Finally, the boy turned his head. His eyes, ancient and young simultaneously, carrying centuries of potential life and only a handful of years of actual existence, met Lucien's. "Replacement," Elias said with terrible certainty. Lady Nocturne explained, "I am weak.
Flawed.
My blood is the only valuable thing about me. When the time comes, I should be grateful to serve a higher purpose." Lucien's carefully maintained control shattered. His hands trembled as he reached out, slowly, telegraphing every movement, and gently took his son's small hands in his own. The boy flinched but didn't pull away, conditioned not to resist authority. "No," Lucien said, and his voice cracked like breaking ice.
"No, Elias.
Nothing you've been told is true. Lady Nocturne says." "Lady Nocturne is wrong." The words came fierce now, desperate. "She has lied to you, hurt you, made you believe things that should never exist in a child's mind." Elias's face remained carefully neutral, but Lucien saw the war in those ancient eyes, instinct screaming that this was another test, hope whispering that maybe, impossibly, it wasn't. "I am not weak because I feel," Elias said, reciting with a cadence of frequent repetition. "I am weak because feelings make me vulnerable. Vulnerability is extinction for immortals." "Who told you how you feel?" Lucien asked. Elias's mask cracked slightly. "I cried. When the lessons began. I cried and asked for you. And she called that weakness." "It is a weakness." But the boy's voice wavered now. "Isn't it?" Lucien felt something inside his chest, something that hadn't moved in centuries, break open. Ancient ice melting, releasing emotions he'd learned to bury under the weight of crowns and empires. "Elias," he said, and tears he didn't know he could still produce burned in his eyes. "I have lived for centuries. I have commanded armies, forged treaties, and ended wars. And in all that time, I thought I understood strength." He pulled his son closer, slowly, giving the boy every chance to resist. "But I was wrong. Strength isn't surviving without feeling. It's feeling everything and surviving anyway. It's crying when you're hurt and asking for help when you're lost and believing," his voice broke completely, "believing that you deserve to be saved. But I don't." "You do." Lucien pulled Elias against his chest, one hand cradling the back of the boy's head. "You deserve protection, safety, and love. You deserve a father who's present, not absent. And I am so sorry. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry that I left you alone with someone who hurt you." For a long moment, Elias remained rigid in his father's embrace. Then, like a dam breaking, the boy's hands clutched at Lucien's shirt and a sound emerged, not the controlled breathing, not the measured responses, but a raw, broken sob. "I don't want to disappear," Elias whispered against his father's shoulder. "I don't want to be replaced. I don't want the ritual. Please." The word echoed through the chamber like a bell.
"Please."
A child begging not to die. Below them, in the blood sanctum, something shifted. Seraphine's ritual faltered. Lucien felt it through the tower's magic. The bond she'd severed between father and son had just reconnected, blazing to life with desperate intensity. She would feel it too. The monitoring ward shrieked. And somewhere deeper than the sanctum, somewhere in the spaces between worlds, the hollow court stirred in their endless hunger. They felt the bond strengthen. They felt their vessel waking. And they began to scream for food. The tower's scream of alarm hadn't finished echoing when Seraphine appeared in the doorway. She stood perfectly composed, her ritual robes still immaculate, but her eyes blazed with something beyond fury, betrayal, perhaps, or the rage of a plan unraveling after years of careful construction. "So," she said, voice sharp as broken glass, "the king finally returns to his neglected throne." Lucien rose slowly, positioning himself between Seraphine and where Elias pressed against the far wall. Mira had already drawn a blade, small, but edged with blood iron that could harm even immortals. "Step away from my son." "Your son?" Seraphine laughed, the sound devoid of warmth. "The child you abandoned for months at a time? The heir you couldn't be bothered to know? He's been mine far longer than he's ever been yours, Lucien. You tortured him. I prepared for him." Seraphine stepped into the room, and the air grew cold with her power. "I forged him into something useful. Something perfect. You wanted an heir to your empire. I'm giving Velmora something far greater." The floor beneath them trembled. Then, with the grinding sound of ancient mechanisms awakening, stone panels in the floor began to slide apart, revealing stairs that descended into darkness that felt wrong, not merely absence of light, but a void that seemed to pull at reality itself. The ritual chamber. Mira breathed in horror. "It's directly beneath his room. She's been preparing him while he slept. While he breathed the incense of opening," Seraphine confirmed. "While he dreamed the dreams I fed him. Every night for 4 months, his essence has been marinating in threshold magic. He's already halfway transformed Lucien. The hollow court has been tasting him in his sleep." Elias made a sound, small, broken, terrified. "You're insane," Lucien said, but even as the words left his mouth, he understood this was worse than madness. This was ambition without limit, power worship stripped of all constraints. "I'm a visionary." Seraphine gestured, an unseen force yanked Elias from the wall, dragging him toward the stairs. "You built Velmora on compromise and treaties. I will build it on absolute dominion. The hollow court will grant us power beyond anything the Crimson Accord ever imagined." "They'll consume you," Lucien snarled, lunging forward. Seraphine's magic met him like a wall. The impact sent him crashing back, and in that moment, she descended the stairs with Elias floating behind her, trapped in her telekinetic grip. "Come then, husband," she called from below. "Watch what your absence created." Lucien and Mira plunged down the stairs into a chamber that shouldn't exist, a vast space carved from living rock, its walls covered in symbols that hurt to look at. At the center, a circle of mirrors stood arranged in ritual formation, each one reflecting not the chamber, but something else. Something hungry. The hollow court stared out from those mirrors. Not with eyes, they had no eyes, but with presence that made mortal souls scream. Consciousness without form, thought without flesh, hunger without end. And they were speaking, not in words, but in impressions that crashed against Lucien's mind like waves. Vessel.
Blood. Gateway. Flesh.
"You see?" Seraphine stood at the circle's edge, holding Elias suspended above the mirrors. "They've waited centuries for this. Pure royal blood, freely given. He's a child." Lucien roared, his voice shaking the chamber. "He cannot freely give anything. He doesn't need to." Seraphine's expression was almost pitiful. "That's the beauty of it, Lucien. He's already prepared. The threshold recognizes him. The hollow court has already accepted his essence. In 3 nights, during the new moon, they will complete the crossing. Elias's body will become their anchor, and through him, they will grant me power to reshape Velmora into something magnificent. He'll die. He'll transcend." Seraphine corrected. "His consciousness will merge with theirs." He'll become eternal in ways even we cannot imagine. It's an honor. It's murder. Mira screamed and lunged. Seraphine's hand moved casually, and force struck Mira like a hammer. The woman flew across the chamber, struck stone, and crumpled. Lucien felt rage beyond anything he'd known in centuries, beyond war, beyond blood feuds, beyond every battle that had forged his legend. This was primal, absolute, the fury of a father watching his child offered to monsters. He unleashed everything. The chamber exploded with his power. The stone cracked. Mirrors shattered. The very air ignited with magic, so raw it began eating through reality's fabric. But Seraphine was ready. She'd been planning this confrontation for years. Her counterspells were already woven into the chamber's foundation, drawing power from the threshold itself. Their magic collided in the center of the ritual space, and the backlash created a shockwave that nearly collapsed the tower above them. "You cannot stop this," Seraphine hissed through the maelstrom. "The elder houses support me. The Crimson Accord is already broken. Velmora has chosen its future, and it chose me. Then Velmora chose damnation." But even as Lucien fought, he felt the chamber's terrible truth. Seraphine was right. The ritual was too far advanced. Elias's essence had been soaking in threshold magic for months. The hollow court had already begun weaving themselves into his immortal core. Across the chamber, Mira struggled to rise, blood streaming from her temple. She crawled toward where Elias hung suspended, reaching out with desperate hands toward a child she'd sworn to protect. "Elias," she screamed. "Fight it. You are not replaceable. You are." Seraphine's magic lashed out, wrapping around Myra's throat. Enough of the help. The woman's eyes bulged. Her fingers clawed at an invisible force crushing her windpipe. And Lucien faced the impossible choice: save Mira and lose Elias to the completion of the binding, or press his attack and watch an innocent woman die for her loyalty. In that moment of hesitation, Seraphine smiled. "You see? This is why you could never rule absolutely. Sentiment makes you weak." She released Mira, letting her collapse gasping, and turned her full attention to the ritual. Words poured from her mouth in the first language, in the forbidden tongue, in sounds that predated civilization. The mirrors began to glow. The hollow court pressed against the threshold, their hunger building to crescendo. Lucien threw himself forward, determined to shatter every mirror, to collapse the chamber, to bring the entire tower down if necessary. And Seraphine completed the invocation. The threshold opened. Not fully, not yet, but enough. A crack in reality, through which something began to seep. Not light, not darkness, but absence. A void that consumed rather than filled. It touched Elias's suspended form, and the boy screamed. Not in pain. Worse. In recognition of what he was becoming. The hollow court began to feed. Elias's scream carved through Lucien's soul like a blade forged from every failure, every absence, every moment he'd chosen empire over family. The void poured into his son, transforming the child's essence into something hollow and hungry. Elias's eyes began to change, their natural warmth draining away, replaced by the terrible emptiness of the hollow court's endless starvation. Vessel. Anchor.
Gateway.
The words pounded through the chamber, through Lucien's mind, through reality itself. And then Lucien remembered. The Crimson Accord wasn't just law, it was covenant. Written in the combined blood of every founding house, sealed with oaths that transcended politics and power. And within those oaths, buried in the deepest clauses that no one invoked because the cost was absolute, lay the right of substitution. A parent could offer themselves in place of their child. Not in death, in essence. In the very immortality that defined them. No, Seraphine breathed, horror dawning in her eyes as she saw understanding crystallize in Lucien's expression. Lucien, don't you dare. But Lucien was already moving. Not attacking. Not destroying. Instead, he drew his ancient blade across both palms, letting his blood, pure, undiluted, carrying centuries of accumulated power, pour onto the ritual circle. The words came from memory older than Velmora itself, from the first covenant, from the oath that bound every immortal to the protection of their lineage. By blood given freely, by essence offered wholly, I invoke the right of substitution. Let the vessel be changed. Let the offering be transformed. Take me instead. The chamber froze. The hollow quartz feeding stopped mid-consumption, their presence suddenly focused entirely on Lucien. He felt their tension like pressure enough to crack mountains, their hunger suddenly redirected from child to king. Impossible, they whispered through the mirrors. This was not the bargain. The Crimson Accord supersedes all bargains, Lucien said, his voice resonating with the weight of ancient law. You cannot refuse a willing substitution. The covenant compels you. Ancient blood. Centuries of power. This is greater. Seraphine lunged forward, her composure finally shattered.
No.
The ritual requires the child. Pure, uncorrupted. The preparations were specific. The preparations were always secondary, Lucien said, meeting her eyes. You needed royal essence. You needed power. I am offering you something far greater than a frightened child who's barely begun his immortal existence. He stepped into the circle. Immediately, the void that had been consuming Elias redirected. It slammed into Lucien like a tidal wave of endless hunger, and he felt his immortality beginning to unravel. Not his life, but the eternal nature that had sustained him for centuries. His power drained away. The magic that had made him unkillable, that had kept him unchanged through ages of warfare and politics, began flowing into the threshold. The hollow court screamed with satisfaction. Stop. Seraphine's voice cracked with desperation. She threw herself at the circle's edge, trying to break the invocation. You don't understand. Without your immortality, you'll age. You'll become mortal. Everything you are will be worth less than my son's life, Lucien finished. The void intensified, pulling harder. Lucien felt centuries draining away. 500 years. 600.
7.
His body began to change, not visibly yet, but fundamentally. The eternal nature of his cells breaking down, mortality seeping back into flesh that had forgotten death. Across the circle, Elias collapsed as the hollow court released him, the boy's essence flooding back into his small body. Mira crawled to him, pulling him away from the ritual space. Father. Elias screamed, suddenly fully present, fully aware. Father, no. But Lucien smiled through the agony of transformation. I'm here, he said. I'm finally here. Seraphine realized then that she'd lost. The hollow court was feeding on Lucien's essence instead, and the ritual parameters had shifted beyond her control. She tried to redirect the magic, to salvage something from the unraveling plan. The threshold rejected her. She'd promised it one thing and delivered another. She'd broken a covenant with entities that existed beyond mortal concepts of forgiveness. The void that had been flowing into Lucien suddenly reversed. No, Seraphine whispered. No, I am your servant. I opened the way. I gave you. You gave us lies, the hollow court said, and their voices carried the weight of cosmic judgment. You offered covenant and delivered betrayal. Now you will replace what was promised. The shadows she'd summoned turned against her. Seraphine's scream lasted only a moment before the void consumed her, not her body, but her essence. Her immortality unraveled in seconds, her power absorbed into the hungry darkness she'd courted for years. Then, with nothing left to anchor them, the hollow court began to collapse back through the threshold. This is not finished, they promised as they receded. The debt remains. But Lucien, with the last of his draining power, spoke the words of sealing. Words from the Crimson Accord's foundation, from the covenant that had bound Velmora's immortals to protection of the threshold between worlds. By blood given, by essence spent, by sacrifice made, I seal this threshold against your return. No bargain remains. No debt survives. The accord is satisfied. The mirrors shattered. The void contracted. The threshold closed. The ritual chamber fell silent except for Lucien's ragged breathing that sounded wrong, irregular, mortal. He collapsed. Elias was there instantly, small hands catching his father's shoulders. Father, stay with me. Lucien looked up at his son, truly looked at him, with eyes that were already beginning to age, to lose their immortal clarity. I'm not going anywhere, he promised. Not anymore. Above them, beyond the chamber, beyond the tower, dawn was breaking over Velmora. True dawn, with sunlight that Lucien could suddenly feel again, warmth he hadn't registered in centuries, because immortal flesh didn't process temperature the way mortal bodies did. Mira staggered over, her face bloodied but alive, tears streaming down her cheeks. The tower's wards are collapsing. Seraphine's death broke her bindings. We need to move. Help me, Elias said, trying to lift his father. Together, they pulled Lucien to his feet. He stumbled, his balance off, his strength a fraction of what it had been. His heart was beating, truly beating, working to circulate blood through a body that now required such mechanisms. They climbed the stairs slowly, leaving behind the shattered mirrors and the fading echoes of entities that had almost consumed everything. When they emerged into Elias's chamber, dawn light streamed through the windows, light that would have meant nothing to Lucien hours ago, but now carried the weight of miracle. The vampire king stood at the window, one hand on his son's shoulder, and breathed like a mortal. Mortal. Finite.
Alive.
The news of Seraphine Nocturne's death spread through Velmora like wildfire through dead wood, swift, consuming, transforming everything it touched. By sunset of that first day, the elder houses had convened an emergency session. House Corvain, House Eldreth, House Mordain, the conspirators who'd helped corrupt the Crimson Accord, arrived with calculated expressions of shock and carefully rehearsed ignorance. Lucien met them in the grand hall, and they stopped cold when they saw him. He looked different. Not visibly aged yet. Mortality took time to etch itself into immortal flesh, but something fundamental had shifted. His presence no longer carried the weight of eternity. He moved like someone aware of time's passage, spoke like someone who understood endings. She acted alone. House Corvain's patriarch began, the lie smooth as silk. We had no knowledge. Stop. Lucien's voice was quieter than before, but somehow more absolute. He placed a document on the table between them. Evidence Mira had gathered, blood signatures proving their complicity. You have two choices. Confess your involvement and submit to a court arbitration, or I release this to every house in Velmora and let them decide your fate. The silence that followed was exquisite in its terror. We were persuaded. House Eldreth's representative finally admitted. Seraphine promised expanded territories, increased influence. We didn't know the full extent. You knew enough. Lucien's eyes, still ancient despite his mortality, held them pinned. You felt the accord fracturing and said nothing. You benefited from violations that should have revolted you. That ends now. Within 3 days, the Crimson Accord had been rewritten. The elder houses gathered in the blood sanctum, cleansed now, purified of threshold corruption, and one by one, they renewed their oaths. This time, the clauses were explicit, unambiguous, reinforced with detection magic that would alert all signatories to any future violations. And this time, there was a new clause. The protection of heirs supersedes political convenience. Any house that harms a child of the blood answers not to law, but to every other house united. Elias stood beside his father during the ceremony, small and quiet, but no longer invisible. When it was finished, Lucien found Mira in the archives where she'd spent 7 years documenting horrors no one else would see. The elder houses are prepared to offer you formal recognition, he said. Noble status, land, position on the Accord Council. Name your price for what you've done. Mira looked up from where she was gathering her few possessions and smiled, tired, but genuine. I want to leave Velmora. Lucien blinked. Leave. I spent 7 years trapped in this tower, watching evil flourish because I was too afraid to act until the very last moment. She closed the bag she'd been packing. I don't want power, Your Majesty. I don't want recognition. I want to go somewhere that doesn't know my family screams, somewhere I can remember them without seeing the place where they died. Where will you go? I don't know yet. Mira shouldered her bag. But I think that's the point. For the first time since I was 14, I get to decide my own future. Lucien understood. Freedom sometimes looked like departure, not reward. If you ever need anything, I know where to find you, Mira said. Then, impulsively, she stepped forward and hugged him. Brief, fierce, the embrace of someone who'd fought beside him in ways that transcended class or custom. Take care of him. He's braver than either of you know. Then she was gone, disappearing into the dawnlit streets of Velmora with nothing but a bag and the freedom to finally be invisible by choice rather than necessity. The weeks that followed brought transformation of a different kind. Lucien restructured his entire approach to rule. The night convocations became shorter, bound by specific time frames. Blood treaties were negotiated closer to home, with provisions for his presence in Velmora. He delegated responsibilities he'd once hoarded, trusting other houses to manage what he'd insisted only he could handle. His absence had created the conditions for horror. His presence became the foundation for healing. Elias began to change too, slowly, carefully, like a plant that had grown in darkness finally reaching toward light. The rigid posture softened. The controlled breathing became natural. The silence transformed from a survival mechanism into genuine peace. Lucien hired tutors who understood trauma, brought in healers who specialized in unmaking psychological conditioning. He sat with Elias during nightmares, held him through flashbacks, proved through consistent presence that authority could mean protection instead of punishment. Some days were harder than others. Elias still flinched at sudden movements, still occasionally knelt in old patterns before catching himself. The damage couldn't be erased, only slowly, painstakingly healed over time measured in decades rather than days. But there was progress. Laughter, tentative at first, grew more frequent. Questions asked without fear of consequences. Curiosity that had been beaten down now cautiously emerged. One evening, 6 months after the threshold closed, Lucien found Elias in the tower's highest observatory, staring out over Velmora's glittering expanse. Can't sleep? Lucien asked, settling beside his son. I can, Elias said. I just wanted to watch the city. Is that allowed? The question still carried echoes of conditioning. Is this allowed? Is this acceptable? Will I be punished? But it was asked with hope rather than dread. You never need permission to exist, Elias, Lucien said gently. This is your home. These are your hours. You are allowed to fill them however you choose. They sat in comfortable silence, not the terrible quiet Seraphine had demanded, but the peaceful kind that existed between people who trusted each other. Father? Elias said eventually. Yes. The tutors say you're mortal now. That you'll age and, eventually, the child struggled with the concept. Eventually die. Yes, Lucien confirmed. That's the price I paid. Mortality in exchange for your life. Do you regret it? Lucien looked at his son, really looked at him. Saw the child who'd learned to disappear learning instead to take up space. Saw fear transforming into courage, silence becoming voice, worthlessness replaced by slowly rebuilding self-worth. Not for a single second, he said. Elias leaned against his father's side, and Lucien wrapped an arm around the small shoulders that no longer had to stay perfectly straight. Below them, Velmora continued its eternal dance, lights flickering, people moving through streets they believed safe because someone, somewhere, had chosen sacrifice over power. The city didn't know what had happened in the threshold chamber, didn't understand the price paid in that ritual circle. They simply lived, unaware that their continued existence had balanced on the edge of a father's desperate gamble. And that was fine. Let them be unaware. Let them live without knowing how close extinction had come. Lucien had learned that true power wasn't commanding through fear or ruling through absence. It was being present for the moments that mattered, protecting what deserved protection, and understanding that sometimes the greatest strength was admitting you'd been wrong. The silence used to scare me, Elias whispered. When it got too quiet, I knew something bad was about to happen. And now?
Lucien asked.
Elias was quiet for a moment, listening to the peaceful hush of night, to the distant sounds of the city, to his father's breathing beside him, steady, mortal, present. Now it just means we're safe, he said. Lucien pulled his son closer. Watching dawn approach over the city, he'd almost lost, feeling his heart beat with the rhythm of something finite and precious and finally, truly alive. Silence no longer meant obedience. It meant safety.